Welcome to this Inbound Logistics video podcast presented by Inbound Logistics Magazine. Today we're going inside the Port of Los Angeles and talking trade shifts, tariffs, and tech. And our guest is Gene Seroka, Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles, the busiest container port in North America. The port's experienced a series of record-breaking performances since his appointment, which was confirmed by the Los Angeles City Council in June of 2014. In addition to setting multiple monthly and quarterly cargo records, Los Angeles is the first and only port in the Western Hemisphere to process more than 10 million 20-foot equivalent units in a year, a milestone that the port has achieved 3 times. As Executive Director, Seroka interacts with a wide range of stakeholders, including port customers around the globe, industry partners, elected and appointed officials at all levels, business leaders, community organizations, and residents. A respected global trade expert, Seroka has advocated for rules-based trade agreements that benefit American exporters and manufacturers. And here's our host, Amy Roach.
Thank you, Jeff. And Gene, hello, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to see you, Amy.
You too, as well. I'd like to start by giving our listeners a feel for the current dynamic there at the port. If you could tell me a little bit, what are you seeing as some of the biggest trends right now, and how is the port responding to that? What initiatives or programs is the port undertaking to address the biggest trends going on today?
Well, I think the biggest trends are the trade policy that are kind of being meshed a little bit with industrial policy back in Washington, and the geopolitics around the world, which has an impact on supply chains at every front that we face today.
Absolutely. And tell me a little bit about the port, how you're responding to some of those changes and those shifts.
I'm trying to stay ahead of news, announcements, and things that may affect supply chain participants. Mm-hmm. Having been in this business a long time, lived in Asia and the Middle East on the ground for over 11 years, and having worked in 50 countries, I bring a different perspective, as does this port. And that's why making sure that we work very collaboratively across service providers, importers, exporters, and others in the supply chain, just to lean on each other and make sure that we're doing things that are in the best interest of the U.S. economy and trying to drive jobs, performance, and making sure people get their product to market when they say they need to.
Absolutely. And I know you're coming off what was the port's busiest June on record, largely driven by shippers trying to outrun those July tariff deadlines. Can you walk us through a little bit what that looked like for you at the port?
Well, it's been really interesting over the past couple of years. When importers see a window of opportunity, they speed cargo through market. And in this particular case, basically, they would tell me, I know my landed cost. I know that I've got some shipping schedules that are favorable, and everything else is kind of lining up for this short period of time, in this case, until July 24th, when the temporary tariffs were set to expire. So I'm just going to move as much product as I can and build up inventories, get product pre-positioned to market for seasonal activity if I'm a retailer, or for the manufacturing sector to make sure I've got a steady supply of parts and components for the American manufacturing system.
And there have been so many changes. I want to talk a little more about the tariffs. There have been so many changes, so much uncertainty, and we don't know what's coming up next for sure. Do you see any scenario where this trade situation stabilizes into something more permanent, or are we kind of just flying in this unknown for a while now?
I have no indication of any permanency, but that's what businesses and trade policy experts in other countries around the world continue to request. Let's at least just know the ground rules so we can get to work. And if the base case is going to be higher fuel costs, higher landed costs through tariffs, shifting supply chains of sourcing and manufacturing to other countries, fine. Let's get to the work. But what most are doing are simply scenario analysis around the clock. If something happens, what does my company now look like? How do I have to respond? So that lack of permanency really has kept folks on edge for the past couple of years.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they have to be so flexible, right? I mean, I'm sure you're seeing that as well. They have to put changes into practice kind of on the fly all the time now.
Yeah, as quickly as possible. And we've seen that across a variety of sectors, but it's about the anticipatory skills that importers have right now of trying to understand when the waters are relatively calm and then getting to the work as quickly as possible. And that's really built up through all that scenario analysis and collaboration that they're working on day in and day out. The area that's still a struggle is on the export side of our business, and in particular, the agriculture sector, where trading partners have not necessarily only introduced retaliatory tariffs, but simply have made deals with other trading nations, leaving the U.S. behind. Soybeans, number 5 red wheat, various types of almonds, pistachios, etc., are now coming out of Australia. The soybeans are coming from Brazil and Argentina, leaving our farmers with a lot more crop and fewer customers with which to sell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I want to shift in to talk about another major factor of instability now is the Iran conflict. Tell me a little bit how that has that disruption has impacted the importers and exporters and the port itself.
It's been a struggle. Having lived and worked in the Middle East for over 5 years, I maintained some really good business contacts and a lot of friends throughout the region. And it was so interesting. I was texting with a friend shortly after February 28th who lives in Dubai. I just asked how you were doing. Bashir Ahmed came back to me and said, well, the authorities are telling us stay inside, stay away from windows. Other than that, we're doing okay. So life has changed dramatically, even at places like Dubai, an international hub for trading, banking, tourism, and business. What we've also seen is that although only 10% of container traffic moves in and out of the Arabian Gulf, Red Sea, and East Africa, it's taking about 95% of the attention from leadership and supply chain and shipping communities, trying to build scenario analysis again, this time around energy prices and how these disconnected routes will impact overall global performance and commitment to customers. So as we've well recounted in the media, about 20% of energy products move out of the Arabian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz, which effectively has been shut down or very limited now over 6 months since this war began. Prices have spiked on the vessel fuel side. They're up 60% here in Los Angeles compared to the start of the war. Gas prices at the pump are up 25%, and diesel prices are up by more than a third. This is of particular importance to us here in Los Angeles because the cargo that moves in and out of this port, 2/3 of it goes over the road by truck. Many of those truckers are small to middle-sized businesses who have great difficulty absorbing the impact of higher transportation costs in the name of fuel.
Absolutely. And how much of that gets passed through to shippers? Those costs have to go somewhere.
Yeah, it's all situational. Safe to say, importers and exporters are paying higher costs for the ship fuel, that of diesel, and the overall costs that are generated because of the uncertainty of how products and components make their way to market. Much has been talked about the plastics market with PET resins and inputs to that area. So all those costs continue to rise. And how folks grapple with that simply means that it's a higher price for you and me when we go to buy product at the store.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you counsel shippers in this environment if mid-size importer, say, comes to you, how do they prepare for the next 6 months? What can you say?
Well, most of us continue to understand that this is a relationship-based business. And leaning on each other in difficult times, whether it's financial crises or COVID-19 and what that did to the supply chain all the way through to today, if there's any silver lining that comes out of all of this challenge in the supply chain, it's the fact that folks have come together even closer and trying to help each other out. The counsel that we give to each other really is just sharing as much information as possible about what's going on, taking away the rhetoric and the story building and try to deal specifically with facts. In many cases, it's about designing workarounds. And there's no shame in that. If you've got to be resilient, got to bring cargo to market, finding the best way to do so in uncertain times is the step forward that we all need to continue to make. So whether it's the National Retail Federation, Retail Industry Leaders Association, Agricultural Transportation Coalition, and so many others, including right here at home, the Harbor Trucking Association, LA Brokers and Forwarders, everyone is in communication around the clock. It's trying to make sure they're up to speed on the latest. And when decisions are rolling out for change, kind of beta testing it with trusted partners to make sure that folks are taking the risk associated with all of that research in the best way possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, let's shift a little bit. I want to talk about China. I understand that China's share of port imports has dropped from roughly 60% at your peak to about 40% today, even as the total volume keeps growing. So I'm curious as to what is filling that gap for you there at the port.
Yeah, it's interesting. And your stats are exactly right, Amy. And yet we've still grown over these past 10 years. When the first Get Tough on China policies came out back in 2018, we saw real run-ups in cargo until tariffs were implemented. And then by the end of 2019, in the fourth quarter, our business dropped by about 16% because simply as a country, we had built up so much inventory of brake pads, computer keyboards, and non-seasonal items that really you started to see the brakes put on a little bit. And then we got into COVID, which changed everything in the supply chain as we knew it at that time. The work with China continues. It's still 40% of our business, the single largest trading partner by nearly 2 times compared to the second. And the other thing that's really important to understand in today's environment is that based on statements from the 15th five-year plan of the central government in China that came out last November, they want to be known not only for exporting products, but now exporting manufacturing expertise. So you see China investing in factories and supply chains across Southeast Asia and around the world with concepts like the Belt and Road program. But the manufacturing know-how and how to bring products to market, these supply chains that have been developed over the better part of 45 years, are not simply installed only in mainland China. You're starting to see that effect and participation in other countries across the Pacific.
Interesting. And I understand there at the port that you've used a multi-pronged strategy to help in this pivot away from heavy reliance on China trade. So tell me a little bit about what the port has done to differently capture cargo from other origins.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into this, but I don't think we've pivoted away from China. Again, from the port's perspective, our job is to build up trade and economic value, create employment opportunities, and be a good neighbor across the vast area of this port complex in the harbor and the millions of people that live along key commerce corridors. So we're still trying to ramp up every pound of freight we can coming from China and going there for the American exporter. But as they get involved in places like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, we're trying to be there front and center as well. So my travels take me to key trading hubs as well as far-reaching locations to make sure people understand, even in this uncertain geopolitical environment, it's still the same Port of Los Angeles. We still want to do business with you. And at the same time, knowing that our success over the past decades has been built on a speed component in our strategy of getting cargo from Asia to LA and through the United States faster than anyone else can, that must remain intact. So we've worked very closely with our shipping line allies to make sure that we've put in nonstop services from Southeast Asia. You see, because the challenge in more normal times is the transit differential by going straight from point A to Los Angeles versus going through the Suez or Panama canals. There's a cost to that freight, inventory carrying. There's a cost component on price of the shipping container, and now a huge component of fuel. So if we can keep the transit time differential relatively large compared to shipping through those canals and adding in those additional costs of higher interest rates and fuel component, which is now upwards of 25-30% of a vessel voyage, we remain very competitive. So there's a little bit of a look from an industry knowledge perspective combined with current events that's kept us relevant and growing our business here at the Port of LA.
Yeah, and to keep up in that competitive aspect, I'm sure that infrastructure is crucial. Can you tell me about some of the current infrastructure projects that you're working on there at the port?
Yeah, that's our bread and butter. And headed up by Bureau Chief Dina Arian Zalen, we have more than 160 infrastructure projects here at the Port of Los Angeles across a variety of sectors. Shipping business accounts for about 2/3 of our top line revenue. So that's really the driving force of Dina's initiatives. But three come to mind immediately. One, behind me, you see the iconic Vincent Thomas Bridge, which was completed in 1963. It's currently going through a redecking process to make sure it's safe and secure for the 54,000 vehicles that cross it every day. Only about 8% of the container cargo makes that move across the Vincent Thomas, but very important to the workforce that goes from the residential communities of San Pedro, Wilmington, Harbor City, Harbor Gateway on to Terminal Island. Just last Thursday, the port and the state of California signed an agreement to explore the opportunity to build a new bridge. The ships are bigger and require greater air clearance than this bridge will allow for. So we're going to go out to market. I'm heading to New York this Wednesday to talk with banks and financial institutions and drum up investment on what needs to be a much taller bridge, and maybe one with 3 lanes in each direction as opposed to 2, shoulders on each side to prevent backups, and a modernization plan that helps really catapult the 40% of port capacity that lies on the other side of that span. We're also offering to the public for the first time in a generation a brand new container terminal, Pier 500. Bids on that are due December of this year. And looking at an area of about 200 acres right on the Pacific Ocean, we've been putting landfill in that area for the better part of 2 decades. All that remains is 15 feet of water to cap off in the Pacific. The ability to drive more cargo, 88,000 direct and indirect jobs seems to be really enticing to the shipping and supply chain community. And we'll find out more about that when we see the responses to this bid. And lastly, we're building a new cruise center at our outer harbor terminal area. The cruise ships, like the one you see behind me, have grown to now 5,000 passengers. And the vessels are also too big to go under this bridge, make a U-turn in order to berth or park. So building a new $500 million cruise center with the assistance of Carrick's and their partners Loop Capital and Blackstone is sure to be an industry movement forward, because every one of these cruise calls means about $1,300,000 to our local economy within 2 miles of the port. That's retail, dining, and entertainment that really gets sparked by the largest drive market in the country. 20 million of us living in and around Southern California can jump in the car in Riverside at 10 a.m., have lunch here at the iconic San Pedro Fish Market or other locations at the West Harbor Dining Complex, and then get on a 4 o'clock cruise to the Mexican Riviera. So that's just a little flavor of the money that we're pushing through right now. And those last 3 projects could amount to about $12 billion in investment by the port and our partners.
Wow, fantastic. I want to shift again as we are sort of dipping our first toes into the peak season time. I want to ask you some predictions for this year. What do you think the upcoming holiday season is going to look like? Obviously, inventories have already been elevated from that, pre-tariff front loading. So what do you think peak looks like this year?
Now, it's going to be interesting. The American consumer has been extremely resilient through this economy, starting off during the COVID years when we learned how to buy online and curbside pickup became a family outing because we weren't traveling or dining out. And even in the face of higher prices that we've witnessed up and down over the last 6 years, we all continue to buy, dine, and travel. So I'm encouraged by what we're seeing, but there's probably going to be a fulcrum to this that we just don't know yet. How much longer can American families budget for higher fuel prices, those of electricity? The general affordability discussion nationwide is happening, and it's real. That being said, retailers have the inventory in place for seasonal products like back to school, fall fashion, and now we're starting to see all the year-end products from toys to footwear, clothing, etc. So I think we're well positioned from a retail standpoint, and it's a matter of one question being answered, and that's the American family's willingness to spend in light of higher prices.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something we'll continue to watch for sure. I do want to ask you one more topic. I want to focus a little bit on technology, and obviously, everywhere in the supply chain today, we are talking about how AI is, creeping in and being used everywhere. So I understand that you have started to use AI for certain projects. Can you share some details on that?
Yeah, it's in the news every day, and you hear people representing the Magnificent Seven tech companies talking about what this may mean to the worldwide economy and right here at home. We've also got a number of folks talking about how it's going to be a job replacement initiative, and that's got many folks spooked. But here at the Port of Los Angeles, again, the core policies around this port of driving business, creating employment opportunities, and being a good neighbor, this falls right into our sweet spot. So 3 big initiatives that we're running through right now. Number 1 are digital twins. Most of Dina's work over at that Bureau in Development, Construction and Maintenance, along with our naval architects and marine engineers, happens below the water surface. So if we can have real-time digital imagery of what's happening for a project that we're designing or one that we have to repair, those experts can get to the job much quicker than sending scuba divers under to take those images, come back to the office, upload, evaluate, and then get to the work of planning. Secondly, with that redecking project on the Vincent Thomas, we're using geospatial mapping to help route traffic and cargo, making sure that workers get to the job site on time and home safe back in the evenings. And then thirdly, predictive and prescriptive analytics with the Port Optimizer that we implemented over a decade ago here at the Port of Los Angeles. That digital information sharing system now has more than 10,000 users, all provided as a service from the Port of Los Angeles to understand what cargo flows look like. And every day in the supply chain, something happens that gums up the works or changes the schedule. The predictive and prescriptive analytics will allow us a suite of choices presented to experts on the ground so we can make those adjustments in real time. For example, we just put in a new truck reservation system to manage the 2/3 of that cargo that moves over the road. Available appointments have risen to 75%. And if you make a reservation for truck movement, pickup, or drop off a container, you're now 95% likely as a trucking firm to honor that appointment. So we're making some real advances here, all in the name of AI, but maybe taking a little bit of the mystery out of it at the Port of Los Angeles.
Yeah, absolutely. And how would you say that these technologies and having access to the technologies and what they provide, have they changed or shaped the way you make your day-to-day decisions there at the port?
Yeah, I'd like to say we're working a little bit smarter, more collaboratively. Folks that share information with us come across a wide variety of 9,000 transportation companies. And for those on the ground, they're just trying to make sure that they have a better look to executing their supply chains. And for the workforce, maximizing how many people can get out on the job and perform all these great tasks to keep America's economy moving. So to keep up with business, to be more efficient, to grow the economy, and then to make sure that we're being a good neighbor, we now have the lowest footprint of pollution per container shipped since we began measuring over 2 decades ago. Moving cargo smarter reduces pollutions, and bringing technology in that uses renewable and synthetic fuels while expanding the electrical grid can also yield further results to our march towards a zero emission port operation by the year 2030. So I'm really pleased with what technology is allowing us to do. And with jobs on the move upward and pollution down, I'd say we're starting to dial into a formula that's going to be helpful for generations to come.
Fantastic. To wrap up, let's look forward a little bit. If you had to bet on one thing that could define the port's next 12 months, whether that's tariffs, geopolitics, technology, or maybe something else that we didn't touch on, what do you think that would be?
I think it's that relationship aspect, staying connected, staying ahead of the headlines in the news, offering the convening powers of bringing people together to make good decisions for the American economy, the supply chain, companies big and small that count on us so much. Not one has greater than a 5% market share of all the cargo we move through here. So making sure that we stay on top of the situation and sharing that information back and forth, so not only we can make better decisions, but hopefully sharing a little bit of our views and vantage point with the people we count on so much that ship that cargo and that handle it for us every day.
Fantastic. Well, a lot of exciting things going on there, and we look forward to seeing what happens next. Thanks so much for spending time with us today, Gene.
Thank you, Amy.